Recently, in an interview outside the White House, Stephen Miller was once again doing what he's known for, defending the hardline immigration policies he helped craft during the Trump administration. Standing in front of reporters, he spoke confidently, dismissing criticism and championing his controversial legacy as if it were a badge of honor. But that wasn't the end of his media tour. Later that same day, during a live television panel meant to further elaborate on his views, everything took a sharp turn. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, invited to share her own perspective on immigration policy, wasn't about to let Miller's narrative go unchallenged. And in a moment that stunned viewers and sent shockwaves across social media, Crockett interrupted Miller mid-sentence, exposed the cruel reality behind his polished rhetoric, and left him speechless. What followed was a fiery and unforgettable confrontation, so powerful, Miller himself was forced to backtrack and apologize on air. What began as just another policy defense quickly turned into one of the most stunning political takedowns seen on live television. As Miller appeared in the studio, he carried himself with a smug sense of certainty. It was the same demeanor Americans had seen during countless press briefings when he stood behind the podium with that cold precision, selling policies that stripped children from their parents at the border and dismissed entire groups of asylum seekers as threats to national security. With that same rehearsed conviction, he began to speak about preserving the nation's integrity and ensuring legal processes are upheld. For Miller, immigration was less about humanity and more about ideology, a war of culture he believed had to be won through brute policy. His words were chillingly calm, but their implications carried the weight of untold pain for thousands of immigrant families. Sitting across from him, Jasmine Crockett wasn't there for theatrics or political grandstanding. She had come prepared, not just with numbers and statistics, but with the heart and humanity that Miller's arguments lacked. As he attempted to rationalize the infamous family separation policy as a legal necessity, Crockett had heard enough. She leaned forward, voice firm but composed, and said, "Let me stop you right there. You don't get to redefine cruelty as policy." The studio audience froze, and even the panelists turned toward her. Crockett wasn't just responding to a policy point, she was challenging the very foundation of Miller's philosophy. She reminded viewers that these weren't abstract policies, they were lived experiences. Children as young as 6 months old had been placed in metal cages, separated from their parents with no system in place to reunite them. Some of those children are still missing, mothers and fathers deported without their children. She recalled one case in particular, a mother from Honduras who fled violence and arrived at the border seeking asylum. Instead of being processed, she was arrested, and her child taken without explanation. Crockett looked straight into the camera and said, "That's not just inhumane, that's unforgivable." Miller, trying to regain footing, reverted to statistics. He spoke of border apprehensions, drug trafficking, and criminal elements, classic deflection tactics designed to stir fear. But Crockett countered with truth. Let's not conflate refugees with criminals. These are families, many of them fleeing situations the U.S. helped create through foreign policy and economic disruption. You can't set fire to someone's home and then punish them for running. It was a statement that hit hard because it was undeniable. Crockett wasn't just debating, she was dismantling a carefully crafted illusion. What followed was a moment no one expected. Miller, clearly rattled, hesitated before answering. The silence spoke volumes. He glanced at the moderator, then back at Crockett, and for a second, the steely mask cracked. In a softer tone than usual, he said, "I never wanted children to suffer. That was not the intent." Crockett, quick and sharp, replied, "Intent doesn't erase impact." Her words cut through the screen. The room fell silent again as her point settled into the minds of everyone watching. Crockett went further. She described how these immigration policies weren't just traumatic for the families but also destructive to America's moral credibility. "We can't lecture the world on human rights while caging toddlers," she said. "We lose our soul a little more with every child who sleeps on a concrete floor wrapped in foil." She wasn't exaggerating. Reports from facilities across the southern border detailed horrific conditions, overcrowded cells, insufficient food, lack of access to hygiene, and no emotional support. The trauma inflicted on those children may never fully heal. Crockett pointed out that mental health professionals have warned for years about the long-term psychological damage being done. And yet, she said, Stephen Miller wants to call it a deterrent. "I call it disgraceful." Throughout the exchange, Miller tried to steer the conversation back to border control and national sovereignty, but his usual rhythm was gone. Crockett's facts, her passion, and her composure had placed him on unfamiliar ground, accountability. At one point, she challenged him directly, asking, "Would you defend these same policies if it were your child in that facility? If your sister was fleeing rape or murder, Would you call her a criminal for seeking refuge? Miller had no answer. That silence spoke louder than any of his prepared talking points. The confrontation reverberated across the nation. Political analysts, journalists, and activists praised Crockett's courage and clarity. Social media exploded with clips of her shutting Miller down. Hashtags like #CrockettShutsDownMiller and #DefendHumanity trended for hours. Immigrant families shared the video in WhatsApp groups and Facebook pages, expressing gratitude that someone finally stood up to the architect of their suffering. Even longtime critics of the immigration system were stunned by the force and grace with which Crockett held Miller to account. In the days that followed, Crockett continued to speak out. In interviews, she emphasized that her goal wasn't to shame Stephen Miller personally, but to challenge a broken and brutal system that had dehumanized people for far too long. She called for congressional hearings to revisit the consequences of the Trump-era immigration laws. She demanded that family reunification be prioritized and that those responsible for implementing harmful policies be held legally and morally accountable. "We can't move forward until we reckon with what we've done," she said during one appearance. "This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong." Her comments sparked new debates on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers began reviewing legislation related to border enforcement, asylum procedures, and migrant detention conditions. Crockett co-sponsored a bill aimed at banning future family separations and establishing a commission to investigate abuses during the previous administration. Immigration rights groups rallied behind her, organizing marches and petitions, emboldened by the national spotlight she had drawn to the issue. Meanwhile, Miller's attempt to walk back his statements did little to stem the backlash. A day after the interview, he released a carefully worded clarification, claiming his remarks were misinterpreted and that he still believed the policies were essential for national security. But the damage was already done. His moment of hesitation had been caught on camera. His wavering captured in high definition. No press release could erase the image of Stephen Miller struggling to answer Jasmine Crockett's direct and damning questions. Crockett's viral moment didn't just expose the flaws of one man, it exposed the heartlessness of an entire approach to governance. For too long, the debate around immigration had been framed by people who never once had to walk in the shoes of the marginalized. But Crockett's voice brought a sense of justice, empathy, and truth that had long been missing from the national conversation. She spoke not just as a politician, but as a human being who understood that laws must serve people, not punish them for existing. People across the country were inspired. College students wrote essays about the encounter. Civil rights leaders praised Crockett for standing tall in the face of indifference. Immigrant communities began sharing their stories more openly, encouraged by the courage they saw in her. Her moment became more than viral, it became a movement, a push to redefine what it means to be an American, and what America owes to the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett never wavered. She kept reminding audiences that this wasn't about scoring political points, it was about righting wrongs. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," she said. "I'm here to speak for those who were silenced. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, good. Maybe it's time we got uncomfortable with cruelty." In that one interview, a narrative changed. What started as a routine platform for Stephen Miller to reiterate his harsh beliefs turned into a powerful example of truth holding power accountable. Jasmine Crockett didn't just push back, she turned the entire conversation on its head. And she reminded a weary nation that the fight for justice isn't over, that our moral compass still has a chance to point true north if people are brave enough to challenge the status quo. If you believe voices like Jasmine Crockett's deserve to be heard and amplified, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the stories that matter most. Together, we can shine a light on truth, call out injustice, and build a future where compassion leads policy, not cruelty. Stay informed, stay inspired, and keep standing up for what's right.